Ahoy mateys. I'm in the pole barn at my son's house. As I mentioned, I'm taking a little time off from sailing, spending a little time with the family. But I wanted to go over some of the tools that I've been using on my project. Now every project is going to require some different tools, but these are the basics. But you know, like say you trailer your boat, well then you may want to carry something like this, you know, so that you can tighten up the ball joint on this or something like that. And on the sailboat I carry my mast climber with ATN. So there are going to be some special tools. Let's say you have an outdrive. Well, then you're going to need some muffs to go around that, and you know, some different things. But I'm just going to cover what I've been using over the 18 months that I've been out cruising and fixing up. I kind of divide this whole thing up into different categories. For example, my woodworking tools. Now there's some crossover, don't get me wrong, but I also I kind of set that up in my storage locker and my tool bag the same way. So I've got my woodworking, I've got my plumbing, I got my electrical, and then general. So let's start off with the woodworking, and in woodworking I also include my fiberglass work. So let's start off with that. Alright, so you know, you're always kind of short on space, so you want tools to do multiple things. Well, I use a oscillating saw or oscillating tool. This has got a sanding pad on it, but it also has a cutting blade for wood and a cutting blade for steel, so I can cut off bolts. It's got a scraper blade. I can scrape off old varnish, you know, and that's a lot better than a jab saw, you know, trying to cut through things. Or if you had a saw, you know, you'd have something like this. But this thing is going back and forth in there. You don't know what else you're going to hit. So this oscillating saw makes things a lot easier to work with. Then of course, a good battery operated drill. And I have just the one battery, but since I'm doing woodwork project too, I have a hand circular saw. Now it's not going to cut really big pieces, heavy wood, but for what I'm doing, this works out really well. Even cutting straight lines, you can get a guard on this, a fence that will guide it. What I normally do is I just clamp a piece of wood next to where I want to cut, and I just cut right along that. I get a good clean cut. Of course, you're going to need a set of drill bits and some wood bits, paddle bits, and the standard hole saws for, you know, cutting holes in where I've got to run cable or I'm run a new plumbing part, you know, hoses or something like that. So I use these. There are times when you've got some angles to cut. I'm not good at measuring. You know, no matter how many times I cut that piece of wood, it's still too short. Anyway, so I use this. And this, you know, you kind of set this in, figure out what angle you want it, tighten it up. There you go. Just transfer that to whatever you're cutting. I also keep a square on board, and I like this one. It's not real big, but let's say I need to cut a piece of wood, well, whatever that thickness is, okay? Well, I can take this, put that along the side there, just draw my line down. I've got a pretty straight line to start with. And of course, a good sander. Now I use an orbital sander, a vacuum orbital sander. You know, I've been using it so much you can see I need a new catch bag for it, but that's easy to get. And since I'm working with wood, you know, we're going to go through various screwdrivers, and good socket set is important, and wrenches. We'll go over that in a minute. Good scraper. And for the fiberglass work, you want a roll-on tool that when you lay your epoxy in and then put your fiberglass sheet in, you want to roll that in, make sure all the air bubbles are out of it, that you get a good tight seal. Of course, a hammer. You never know when something needs a little bit of nudging. And that's the basics on my carpenter and fiberglass tools. Now let's go into the plumbing part of things. Okay, now plumbing was pretty simple. A PVC cutter, which is also good for cutting heavy hoses like water hoses and even plastic hose. This is a nice cutter. It's much better than a utility knife. I've got a pipe wrench. I've only used it a couple of times, but there are times it comes in handy. Now this is a very handy tool, and I got this from Lynn and Ian. Ian was cleaning out his toolbox, and he had a couple of these. Hose pliers, I guess you call it. You know, get your hose, loosen it up a little bit. It's also what I use this big screwdriver for, help pry it loose, get it started. And I like this type of a screwdriver because you can use this end here on your hose clamps, you know, to tighten and loosen the hose clamps. So this is very handy. This adjustable wrench, I use it in plumbing. I mean, I probably could use a better one, but it works. And I consider changing filters, water filter, fuel filter, those kind of things as part of plumbing. So I have an adjustable filter wrench. This works nice, or you could use a belt cable wrench. That's nice. And a heat gun. This is invaluable, especially putting on new hoses or taking off old hoses. Putting on a new hose, for example, you heat it up a little bit, push it on that barb. When it cools off, that tightens, gives you even a tighter fit. So these are just the basics for my plumbing. Now let's take a look at the electrical. Now on the electric, pretty simple stuff. Good wire strippers and crimpers if you crimp things. Now I like to solder, so I also carry a solder gun on board. Oh, and the heat gun is good for when you use that shrink wrap around the electrical connections to help seal that up. Invaluable is a multimeter, you know, that's going to give you your AC, DC, and continuity. A small set of screwdrivers, because you never know what you're going to get into. And I carry these long bladed or long neck screwdrivers too, in addition to this, because you see how thick that is. Sometimes you can't get down where you need to, and you see it's not quite as long. So this is good. Good wire cutters. Oh, cable cutters. Got to put those up here. Got some big cable cutters too. Now, if you need this on your electric, you got some major things that are being cut, like your battery cables if you have to put new ones on. But this is good for a lot of different things. And then a set of Allen wrenches, standard and metric. And that's the basics for the electric. Next, let's look at the general tools that I use. Alright, now on the general tools, I want to go back to the socket set first and carry several different extensions. Now I've got two different sizes in there plus this one, and I like this where you see you can get different angles on it rather than just straight. And I mentioned some specialty type of things. Okay, well, I have these spark plug. I don't have spark plugs. I've got a diesel engine, but they don't take up a lot of room. I had them in the bag from another project. Maybe my neighbors would need one, or if I get an outboard for a dinghy. So I'm keeping those on board. Then, of course, a good set of open and box wrenches. Now, you should probably carry a metric set. I just happen to have a standard set. But that's where these kind of come in handy, adjustables. Now, I do have another box and open set that's kind of like a ratchet. These are very handy. And invaluable are vice grips, especially if you work alone. Like I was rebedding a bunch of screws, so I took the vice grips on the inside on the nut, went back on the outside, was able to turn it. Now, you know, you have to work this so that it doesn't keep turning, but these are very, very good to have. Then a couple of clamps, as I mentioned earlier on the woodworking, where I clamped the wood for a fence to cut a straight line. This is good for that. On the screwdriver set again, you know, kind of carry some short ones too. A lot of times it's hard to get in there. I'm talking about the hard to get in places. These little S ones with a Phillips and a flathead, these work out really well. Carry a small set of torque wrenches or screws on board. I've used them a couple of times on some special electronic projects, so these are invaluable. And again, of course, you know, your multi-screwdriver. Oh, you know, sometimes you're working on something where you have a couple of thin pieces of metal you're putting together, or thin wood, and you don't want to put a screw through it. It's going to stick out and make a problem. So I use rivets. Now, aluminum rivets are fine for general purpose. You're going to be putting some stress on it. You ought to use stainless steel. Now with this, you're really going to have to crank her down to make it work, but you can get it to work. Needle nose, regular pliers. Oh, hey, got to have a cigar cutter. Now, I'm out of cigars right now, but this is important too. So that kind of covers the general, and I think we've covered just about everything that I've been using over the last 18 months. There's not much more that I've used. Now, I've had to borrow a heavy grinder one time. I had a big project on the fiberglass. I needed to grind a bunch out, and that was helpful. A neighbor had one. I was able to use it. But for the most part, this is the set. And if you've watched some of the other videos, you know I've done a lot of projects on this boat, and this is what I've used. Now, in the next video, we're going to go into some supplies and miscellaneous parts that you should have on board. We're not going to get into the spare parts yet. I just want to talk about what it takes to fix your boat up. Now, a couple other things. You know, you're going to need a drop light. Now, I like this. This is a LED, battery operated. It's got a little hook on the side here that you can hang it up. You know, a standard drop light, you got that cord running all over, the thing gets hot. This never gets hot and produces a lot more light. And then I put everything in a cloth bag. It doesn't bang up the boat that I just fixed up. Well, until next time, happy and safe boating to you, your family, and friends.